Me quedo sola, bebiendo solo cherry cola, en la plaza bajo la farola, con dolor en mi corazón. Dime por favor, ¿cuántos años espero por mi amor? Bye bye.
The luxury of self-destruction to be self-aware. Wow, my mind malfunctions into disreverse. Smile, I walk to get a drink from the machine. Wow, my mind malfunctions. The luxury of self-destruction to be self-aware.
Hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 of our 2-part collection building series. Again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Cassie Carrie. I'm an editorial hairstylist based here in New York City, and building collections is something that I'm super passionate about. So I'm honored to be here as a guest artist with 11 Australia. If you guys didn't get a chance yet to watch part 1, I definitely suggest you do. You can go back to 11's page and under the live tab, see part 1. And we have a lot of really good information in there. So in the first video, we kind of break down everything that goes into the fundamentals of collection building. We talked a lot about the key markers that I always try to hit when I'm building my collections, as well as the markers that I see that are consistent throughout a lot of strong collections. We also talked about things like cohesiveness and power, technique, authenticity, strong creative direction, and elevation. And we also kind of touched base on one of my favorite tricks, of which is drawing out your collections. And that's something we're going to dive into a bit deeper today and show you guys a little bit of more of my drawings and some examples so you can see like how my brain works and why I really like to draw it out. We also covered things like mood boarding. And in part 2, we're going to cover a little bit more of like ways to capitalize off of your work. So, and kind of what that means. I know last class too, I also put up a poll on my Instagram afterwards, and I had all my followers, but also viewers from the original first class kind of send in questions that they had surrounding collection building, or if there's things that I went over that they wanted to hear a little bit more in depth. So at the end of class, we're going to go over a lot of the most commonly asked questions, and so there's some really good ones in there. I'm also going to give you guys a couple more tips and tricks on ways I like to save money when it comes to materials and when I'm building my collections, because again, I've built all my collections on a really low budget compared to some of the ones that you may have heard of before. And that's something that I'm really passionate about too, because I like to make collections feel a little bit more accessible to everybody from all different, budget brackets. So talking a little bit first about capitalizing off of our work, I'll be talking in reference to collection building because this is what our class is about, but into your day-to-day. So this is stuff that I take into my day-to-day work, whether it's on set, doing editorial work, doing clients or content. This is things that you really just want to keep in your back pocket, and you can capitalize off of your work in all different ways, but we're going to obviously talk a little bit more about collection building. Now, picture we've kind of come off the last class, and maybe it's a couple weeks down the line, you started building your own collection, or you started gathering some images that you're excited about. You've taken the time to invest in yourself and invest in your creativity a little bit. Let's go to the next slide too. You've taken the time to invest in your creativity a little bit. Now we've built these beautiful collections, and we have some series of images that we've put so much time and effort and money into. So obviously we want to capitalize off of that as much as possible, right? I'm going to touch on a few of my favorite ways to capitalize off of them, which is competitions, which we talked a little bit about in part 1, but we're going to dive a bit deeper into that, as well as publications and repos. But starting with competitions. So in part 1, again, we talked about competitions a little bit, but I wanted to touch base on that a little bit more because I feel like there's so many different types of competitions and so many ways you can go about it. And like there's global competitions, there's national ones, regional ones, even brands. Certain brands have competitions of their own. Even things like Pantone has competitions. So even though we talked a little bit about goal setting as well, and I feel like even though it's important to keep in the back of your mind maybe some other options like the outside of collection build I mean outside of competitions, I also think it's important to keep goals of maybe like your number one competition you want to enter, but let's have a number two, number three, and number four, and have backup plans so that when you go into it, you have more than one option to fall back on. And like when it comes to, let's say, Naha, for instance, because that's something that I have some experience in. Um, when from what I've seen from working on my own Nahas, as well as what I've seen from assisting people, is everybody works a little bit different, but some people build their collections solely off the idea of entering into one category, whereas some people build their collection and then see where it might fit best. Personally, I generally usually start with kind of an idea. I showed you guys last time going to Pinterest and going to all your saved images and kind of building out what I am inspired by at that moment. Usually I have like a center shot and then I kind of build off of that, but I have a general idea of what I'm excited about, and then I see where that might live and what category that might fit into, because I feel like it's really important to study the categories you're trying to enter into, specifically because each category has markers that you're supposed to hit when you're with your images. And they also have guidelines of things like what the judges are looking for, whether it's avant-garde, they want something that's super new and experimental, or color, they want certain like there's so many guidelines for each category. So that's why I feel like it's important to kind of narrow in where you want to go, but also something that I think is really important is also having the flexibility to be able to change if you want to or need to. And I feel like being able to be a flexible artist is something that is only going to help you improve, and it's really, really smart. And again, going into this with kind of like a stronger plan is going to set you up for success. I said this before, but I'll say it again. If you're working as a one-man show, you have to prepare like you're a one-man show. So if you're going into this without a bunch of assistants or without a huge team behind you that can help, you need to prepare like that. So that includes studying the past collections. That includes studying which categories you're looking to get into, and set yourself up for success. Go in with like some sort of a game plan, and just do your research. That being said, I think it's really, really important to be flexible, because let's say, for example, you build a collection with the intent to enter it into avant-garde. And as you're building it, you're like, yeah, this could work. Like, I think it's going to be great. But as you shoot it, you're seeing that maybe the pieces aren't as expansive as you thought they would be, or they're not reading the exact same way that you thought they would. So maybe it feels more like a styling and finishing collection versus an avant-garde collection. That's totally okay. Don't get hung up on that. I think everyone would be really surprised to see how often that actually happens, because we're supposed to be flexible. And when you put all the pressure on yourself to enter one specific category, you might feel like you didn't do enough to get in there, but when actually it could fit into another category better. This is also where I think it's really important to check regulations again, because a lot of award shows allow you to enter the same collection into more than one category. For example, NAHA is kind of specific in which you can and can't enter, but I have another perfect example of this where one of my best friends, she built this really incredible color collection. And she had it in her brain for a while. She worked really hard on it. There was a lot of insane like color mapping. And as she was shooting it, the styling on it was really strong as well, and really like classically beautiful. And why not enter into, why not enter into styling and finishing as well? Why does it have to be just color? So last minute, she decided to enter it into color as well as styling and finishing. And it turns out that collection actually didn't get nominated for color, but it did for styling and finishing. So she originally, built this whole color collection, and she just took a chance to enter it because it was a good styling collection as well. And instead of, not getting nominated for color, she still walked away with a nomination for styling and finishing, just because she decided to do that last minute. So I think it's really important to take a look at that, as well as things like, let's say, for one shot. Sometimes you can capitalize off of one image within the collection, or you can enter every single image in that collection to the same category or different categories, and they might pick and choose where it fits best. So sometimes in the past, I've been lucky enough to have a few of my collections either nominated or win more than one award off of that one collection, because I decided to enter it into multiple categories, but also enter each image individually into separate categories as well. And so that kind of just means, like, picture it as like your one investment into yourself, that one investment into myself. And that one collection that I shot for that year got nominated for multiple different things, yes, but also it got like millions of extra eyes on it that maybe I wouldn't have gotten on it before. And I just feel like it's so important. That's probably my number one thing too, is like just trying to get as many eyes on your work as possible. And in my experience, one of the best ways to do that is entering competitions, because most of the time these competitions are held at places like hair shows, or they're attached to big convention centers where the hair shows are being held. So you have a lot of people that might not know, what the award shows are. Maybe they do, but they're in the crowd. And it's kind of rare to have, thousands of hairstylists or hundreds of hairstylists in the same building, in the same theater, or wherever the show is going on, and everyone's looking at the same screen and your work pops up. That's the best way to get all the eyes on it and have people really engaged. And then also your name's up there, your Instagram's up there. People are going to follow you because they resonate with your work or they really like it. That's something that I feel like I've, pretty much capitalized off of with every single collection, because I've entered it into so many different things. Now, another thing I want to touch on is publications. So sometimes when this goes back into the goal setting, because sometimes when you go in with the idea of just wanting to be nominated, you kind of forget about all the other little things that you can do to get more eyes on your work. So like, in my opinion, I feel like, why stop at a potential nomination? And if you did get nominated, why stop there also? There's plenty of publications out there that are looking for new work, and looking to get, especially like hair and beauty focused magazines. That's what they're about. So I personally always try to seek that out. And I know not everyone knows this, but say you built this collection, maybe it didn't get nominated, so you have this body of work that hasn't been released yet. A lot of these magazines are like striving to be the first ones to release new work. So before you release it, try to send it out to different magazines. And by doing this, you can go to, let's say, I would say to start researching the magazines you like on Instagram, or go to their websites, go to their bios. You might even be able to see their contacts in their bios, or on the bottom of their websites, where you can kind of shoot them a message or even a DM if it really comes down to it, and just be like, hey, I have this, I have this new collection that hasn't been released yet. I'm wondering if you guys want to take a look at it. Some people might not answer, but some people might. And this also happens too, where if you do get nominated and you've already posted your collection, you might have publications that still want to repost it for you, still want to print it. And maybe they don't want to print that exact one, but they like what you did before. So they're going to reach out to you for a future story to do for them. And so now, not only do you have like all these extra eyes on it that you might not have had before, but you have the chance to have your work printed in a magazine with your name, your team credits, and you have something tangible that you can keep with you, which I personally think is really cool. Now the next one, I know some people might think this is obvious, but I feel like this is where a lot of people might not take advantage of it the way they should. I know I didn't for a while, but when I started, not only did my page grow, but I also felt like more connected with my peers all around the world, and that's reposts. So again, when you've built your collections and you're posting them online, how are you trying to get the most eyes on it as possible? I personally like to tag all of the publications I can. So all of the major hair publications I like, sometimes magazines that like to feature hair stories. Sometimes I tag big artists I really like. And this is a way, one, to get more people's eyes on it, but two, because it brings you, like, sends them a notification, and they might be able to see it sooner than they would have if it was just on their For You page. This also goes for posting on your stories. If I'm posting a picture of one of my recent pieces of work on my story, I'm tagging publications. And one of my favorite tricks when posting on the story is when you're typing, and sometimes it like ruins the image when you see all the text that's up and it's covering your image. You can select what color you want the writing to be and match it to the background and shrink the text really small and just put it in the corner so it doesn't look like anyone's being tagged, but all of those publications and all of those pages are still getting that notification, and they're still getting the notification that they're tagged, so it's really easy for them to repost that onto their story. And so I also like to think of it too. Some of these platforms, have millions of followers. Why not let them? Why not let them push out your work to their audience? Like, not only are they like, have access to these huge followings and stuff, but after all, they're platforms, so they're content creators also. They're always looking for content to push out. Why not give them yours to push out? Um, I can't tell you how many times I've personally followed people from, seeing their work reposted on bigger pages. I feel like that's the most of the time where I follow people is because I see their work that's reposted on these bigger pages, and I go to them and they might have a small following and maybe they're in different parts of the world and maybe I wouldn't have seen their work before. That personally has happened to me. And so, as a result of everything that I do and trying to capitalize off of all my work, I've let people repost, I've let people publish in their magazines, and as a result of that, I've even had people. I think it was last year. I had this person from a small European country that saw my work reposted on a bigger page, and they reached out to me, and they loved my collection so much that they wanted to buy the high res files off of me so that they could blow the images up huge and put them in their salon. And I'm like, of course you can do that. So not only did I connect with somebody from a different part of the world, but then also me and my team got a little extra payment from being able to sell that. So I always try to not feel embarrassed about taking a chance and capitalizing off of my work. And I feel like that's really important because it's easy to do that. Moving on a little bit, I feel like last class we had talked about how important I think it is to test out your hair and test out your ideas and drawing them out. But before you even get to the point of testing them in hair, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to draw. And the reason behind that is because you don't have to be good at drawing to do this. It's simply just to get your idea on paper. I talked about visual learners. So we, like, everything that we do, we're working with our hands, we're working with our eyes. Every step we take is because of something that we're visually seeing. So when you take images out of your head and put them down on paper, it helps you see and it helps you calculate what your next move is. One of the number one things that I like about the drawing is you can kind of dissect how you're going to do the hair. So this is an example from my last year's texture collection. I was like, I had this idea of wanting two solid images on the ends and more of like a transparent hair piece in the center. And I was trying to dissect as I was doing it how I was going to make that possible. And sometimes you'll realize, maybe it's not quite as possible as you think it was, but sometimes it'll help you dissect, what is the first step that you need to take. Maybe you need to create the base so you have a really strong symmetrical base like the triangular shot here, or a base that can withstand hair going straight up off the head that won't be too heavy for the model. So it's like it gets your brain working for all these different steps that you might take. And number two, because you take this image that has been in your brain and you put it down on paper. One, so you don't forget. I don't know about you guys, but for me, my brain is moving 1,000 miles an hour all the time. And so if I get an idea, so I might forget that idea if I don't write it down. So I've had times where I've been on set. This happened actually not too long ago. I was on set and I had this amazing idea that I had to put down, and I did, and that shot actually ended up being one of my favorite shots that I've ever done, and I'm so glad that I drew it at that time, because when I went back to think about, you know, what I was thinking about before and that shot, I tried to redraw it without looking at my original inspiration, and I couldn't remember exactly how it was done. So then when I went back to my original picture that I drew, it kind of sparked that memory, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. And it just started like the ball rolling in my brain. And number three, you might think you have this great idea, but when you put it down on paper, it might not work or fit the story that you're trying to build. So it might not fit it at all. And now I feel like this is where it's so important, because can you imagine, like you've put all this time and effort into building this story, you've drawn it out, and or like you started to draw it out, but before you tested it in real hair, you're like, you're kind of banking on this working. So you've ordered all the hair, you've ordered all the materials that you need. It's only a couple weeks left before you shoot, and then you start building it and it's not working the way you thought it would, or maybe it doesn't fit the story, when you could have just gone back and drawn it out a few times or tried to flip-flop the image in a certain way. And then you wouldn't have had to be in this stressful position. I've had that happen to me plenty of times also. But I would say my number one favorite thing about making these drawings is being able to mix and match the images to make one cohesive story. So one of the ways I like to do this is putting them on like sticky notes and individual images on sticky notes. One, so you don't have to keep redrawing them, but two, because then you can just mix and match what order you want them to be in, or different combinations of which hair pieces can go where. And so I'm going to show kind of an example of this later on, but first, let's go to the next slide. I want to show a couple more of my drawings so you guys can see just how consistent I am with this, and something that helps me. So this is an image from my Hairstylist of the Year collection. And what I was trying to do here was create kind of like these pieces that were coming off the head, but still staying kind of close. And while I was doing this, I was thinking of, when I was drawing this, I was thinking of what materials could I use to create this structure that's strong enough to stand on its own, but also thick enough so they don't look too thin and they're more tubular. So I actually ended up, because of this, researching different things that could fit on the inside of these pieces. And I went with, if you ever go to like Michael's or art supply stores, sometimes you can find these long foam strips, and they come in different shapes. So I found ones that was more cylinder, and I just stuck wire through it and wrapped hair around it, and I built these hair pieces. But me drawing this, one, gave me kind of an idea of how I wanted to sit on the head, but two, because it gave me an idea of how I would need to create it, to create the structure of it standing alone on it, for each piece. And kind of, again, this goes back to like almost anti-gravity here. But when you start with pieces like this, you kind of have to dissect them from the inside out, and that's why drawing really helps. And let's go to the next slide too. I feel like this is an example from my avant-garde collection, and this drawing was based off of the designer Iris Van Herpen, and she creates these really amazing, like, kind of avant-garde, different pieces that are super interesting and incredibly highly detailed. But something I liked about the garment that I saw was the way that it was tight to the neck and then came up on the face and kind of crawled over the face. And as I was drawing this, I was built this collection to be a silhouette collection almost. So I wanted it to be very shadowy, but I still wanted you to be able to see the pieces coming up off the face. And this helped me dissect the fact that I needed the pieces to be actually a bit smaller than what I was originally intending, because I needed to be able to see through them when they came off the face. If all of those individual kind of like strings were too thick, then you wouldn't be able to see or read the facial expression through. And that only happened because I drew it out. And for the next slide, I have another good example. This is obviously not the best drawing ever, but this is also from my Hairstylist of the Year collection. Here, I wanted to create these braids that were coming up off the head. Again, kind of anti-gravity, but this shot was taken by tossing the braids in the air. And I know that's, if people out there haven't done that before, I think it's really fun to try. Just throwing hair in the air, and then it creates this really like cool, airy look. But something I was trying to think about when I was drawing this one is I had done this in the past plenty of times where I had thrown hair in the air or thrown braids in the air. But I wanted this one to be a little bit more airy. And in order to do that, I had to create less braids than what I'm normally used to doing. So because I wanted each braid to have a lot more space in between it when it's up in the air. And that's something that clicked for me as I was drawing, because I was like, wait, if it's too much, then you might not be able to see through it as much as I'm hoping for. And I'm just kind of giving you guys a few little inside looks into my brain because this is just how it works, but I can't tell you how helpful this is to me. And then let's go to the next shot too. I feel like the next one, this is a really cool one because this is from the same collection as this is my avant-garde collection, and it was kind of based off of silhouettes. So as I was drawing this, I really was like drawn to the symmetry between each line and each piece. And as I was drawing it, I was again dissecting the fact that it needed to be a lot thinner than I had originally thought it needed to be. Because if it's too thick, then I'm not going to be able to get as many lines on there as possible. If it's too thick, it's not going to be able to connect to the tiny braids that I created on my model's natural hair. So this helped me know before I even tested it in real hair how small I needed to create the braids. And also, as I was creating it, I realized I had to cut out one of the pieces because when it was going to be on the model, it was going to be a little bit too much or too bulky, and it kind of took away from the image itself. So let's go to the next shot also. This is one of the shots I was talking about where I was on set and I had this amazing idea and it became one of my favorite shots I've ever done. And I had to just throw it down on paper. So I had this idea of taking braids and instead of having them, fall down like they naturally would because of gravity, I wanted them to stick straight up. But I also wanted them to not, to be kind of in line with her jawline or her eyes or her cheekbones and not drop anywhere below that. And that's kind of where this inspiration came from. And then I ended up making two pieces, one on each side, so you kind of get a little bit of crisscross in between. And still to this day, this is one of my favorite pieces that I've ever created. And let's go to the next slide real quick too. So this is this, I'm not sure if anybody or as many people have seen this, but this is I want to say in 2023, I did a hair show at NAHA because in 2022, I won Hairstylist of the Year. And because of that, you're able to put on a show for the next following year during the awards show. This was my first time ever doing a solo hair show or anything like that. And I wanted to create pieces that, one, I had never seen before, and two, they were almost like full body pieces. So instead of the hair stopping on the head or doing hair in a traditional way, I wanted to completely rethink that. And these were inspired by, once again, a fashion piece that I saw. But I was really drawn to just the idea of the pieces being off of the body, but connecting all the way down. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the drawings I had originally created. And even though the images had kind of deferred from these original drawings, some of them didn't. But also what was important is I wanted each look to be kind of monochromatic. And because of that, I had to think of colors that were going to fit together, pop on stage. But also if all the models lined up, I wanted the colors that were next to each other to kind of make sense. So for instance, I separated pink and orange because they lived a little too close to each other. And so I thought it made more sense for them to be separated. And if we go to the next slide, you can see this is like my green image. When I was creating This one, it changed a little bit. We obviously shot this from the side, so it looks a little bit different than it did from the drawing. But what I took from this was kind of the symmetry between the rings that I made. And again, this is shot from the side, so it shows a little bit differently. But the reason I shot this from the side is because I needed the green and the orange to be my anchors on each end of the collection, which I'll show you again in the end. But let's go one more slide over, and you can see this pink one. This one's one of my favorites. It's one of the first ones I built. And I loved this one, and the drawing I feel like is not that far off from what I had originally planned it to be. I loved that the hair was kind of wide off the head and then came closer to the body and then was wide lower down again. And so I also loved that the hair was like really kind of symmetrical and like a little bit more intricate. So I don't know, I just love this one. Let's go to the next one. This was my center shot. This is what I had envisioned as my center shot. One, because blue is my favorite color, but also I knew that the royal blue was a pretty powerful color. So my drawing even is kind of completely different from what the hair ended up being, and that's okay. But I still had this general idea of what I wanted. Just as I was building it for the center shot, I kind of liked how almost perfectly symmetrical it is. And we can't zoom in, but if we zoomed in, you could see kind of, you know, the actual headpiece is very, very symmetrical. And also the way I posed this model, I did that very intentionally, and I'll talk about that when you kind of in like 2 slides or so, we'll see all the images lined up again. So let's go one more slide over, and you can see the purple one. The purple one was again completely different than what my original drawing was. However, not that different. I just kind of made it a little bit less symmetrical because I knew it was going to be standing next to the blue, but it was still like had some meaning to it. And the way this model is posed here was kind of an accident, but we liked how it, like, she kind of looked like a creature. And so we kept it. So let's go to the next slide. And this is the orange one. And something I loved about this one was that it was kind of like no rhyme or reason to it. It was a little bit, even though there's balance in the way that the hair is kind of wide at certain points and comes in at certain points, there was no like true pattern I was following. And it ended up being like, again, one of my favorites. So let's go one more slide over, and you can see all the images lined up again. And this is something I'm going to talk about in a few minutes here, and that is like picking your images so that they anchor each other in and they make sense. For instance, the orange and the green images, I had them kind of do more of like a profile shot because I knew the other 3 were going to be more front on, and I wanted them to anchor the collection together. So instead of seeing this as a showpiece when the models were walking out, I was like, how do we take a showpiece and shoot it as a collection? And that's when we kind of messed around with different poses. And that's why pink and purple are, even though they're facing front on, their bodies are positioned, you know, a little asymmetrical. They have a little bit more going on with them, versus the blue center shot is very front on and very structured. So to my eyes, this reads as a collection, which even though it wasn't originally supposed to be a collection, we shot it as one. But let's go to the next slide. So I think what we're going to talk about here, I brought, these are, you know, drawings that I had from my notebook that I told you guys about, where I have all my extra drawings from different pieces I haven't used. That goes for like editorial stories as well. But I want to take and show you kind of how my brain works when it comes to taking images and mixing and matching them to make sense. So if we take a look at all these images, I picked them because they kind of lived in the same family. They all, you know, have some texture to them. Some of them are a little bit more structured. Some of them have a little bit more airiness to them. But overall, they live generally in the same family. So I thought, okay, there's a potential collection here. Let's go to the next slide. You can see I pulled out these 2 images because I could see them as potentially being really strong center shots. And that's because both the models are facing forward compared to some of the other shots, but also because the hair is a little bit more expansive. It has a little bit more going on to it. So let's go to the next slide. And something when you have, like, let's say you have these two strong images, you want to see if you can fit them in the same collection. We'll see. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And that's where I go back to having the space to be like, okay, maybe I need to save this image for another collection because it's just kind of clashing. In the top row, row 1, you can see I took the center image that's a little bit wider than the rest, and I put it in the center. And I added to the left of it one of the texture shots that is kind of more of a structured bob that's expanded outwards. As well as on the right side, I put the other center image. And when I look at all of these together, something that doesn't, I like how it looks, but something that is kind of, click, it doesn't really quite click for me yet. So then that's when I switch things around. It might look cool, but if there's something that could be exchanged or something that could change, then we try different combinations. So in row 2, we're trying a different combination where we switch the center images. We put the widest 2 out on the sides, which this could also work, but it's still not clicking for me. And I think what it is that the center shot as well as the left shot, they're both facing forward versus the right shot on row 3. Row 2 is more of a profile shot. So I think that was something that was clicking for me. So in row 3, I put the outside profile shot in the center, and I took the 2 front-facing ones and put them on the outsides. So that's something I want to touch on too. Your outside images don't always have to be profile shots. They can be the front shots, or for instance, like when I did my texture collection last year and I had the transparent shot in the center and the 2 solid ones on the outside. You can always do 2 transparent ones on the outside and 1 solid one in the center, but drawing it out helps that kind of start clicking for you in your brain, and you can see what works best. Let's go to the next slide. And I introduced a different image here. On row 1, I kept 2 of the same images from the last slide, which is the center shot that's, again, more expansive, more airy. And I kept the more structured bob that kind of goes out. And then I added another more structured, tight to the head, but cool angular cut on the right side. Now, to me, I feel like this looks good. This looks like a cool collection. But something that's not clicking for me is the fact that on the right-hand side, on row 1, that is like the third image is still facing the same way as the first image. So your 2 outside images are facing the same way. So I took the outside image on the right-hand side and mirrored it, which is row 2. And you can see just how the flipping of the image from looking out to looking in towards the center shot kind of anchors the collection a little bit more. And it really changes, can be as simple as that, where you literally just have to mirror an image and it might click. It might make more sense. Now, I feel like the 2 outside shots are really good outside shots because it lets the center shot shine a little bit more. And that's where I threw in on row 3 the other potential center shot that we thought of. To me, I still think row 2 is a bit stronger, but here you can see just where you can interchange things to see what works best and what might not work as well. Let's go to the next slide. This is where I threw in kind of the last image of the 5 that we had. And in row 1, I got rid of the 2 original center shots that we thought of and threw in this other one. And to me, this looks like a separate collection within itself. This could even go for maybe a haircutting collection, or maybe like it's just a little bit different than having one of the big expansive images in the center. So I thought this could potentially work as well, and happened, even though I originally thought the other 2 might be really strong center shots, I kind of really liked how all of these are a little bit shorter. And in row 2, you can see I threw the 2 original center shots as the anchor sides, and then kept this new image in the center. And I did this because all of the models in this are facing forward, so you can kind of see how it would read. And instead of like the expansive images being in the center, I put them on the outside because the one in the center is now more condensed and a little bit more structured. So let's go to the next slide. Now that we've done all these different combinations, again, this is easy to do with sticky notes, and something, If I'm doing it with sticky notes, I like to take pictures with my phone as I go so I can flip through and just see which ones were my favorite. So I've kind of pulled out which ones are my favorite. I still think probably row 1 and row 4 are my favorite overall, even though it gets rid of um, that other texture shot that's kind of coming off the head that I originally thought would be a strong center shot. And even though it gets rid of that, I still feel like they're very strong. So this is another great example of why it's so important to draw it out, because maybe if I didn't draw it out and I was just doing it, it could work, but could the collection be stronger if I took that little element away and put something else in its place? So this is just kind of where I like to make my final touches, and then I can go in and start doing it in hair, and then we kind of get into other things where you might need to be flexible and you might change, but it's really important to just have some sort of idea when you're going into it. So let's go to the next slide, and we're going to talk about some questions. So like I said, in after following the last live, I went up to my Instagram and I put up a poll and had people send me some questions that they have, and these were the most common ones that came through. The first one is, where do I source my hair from? And this is one where I feel like is great, coming off of the fact that we just built that mini collection, because when I'm sourcing my hair, I like to know where I'm going with the collection before I buy the hair, so that I'm not buying a bunch of random stuff that's unneeded. I am lucky to live in New York City or close to New York City, so I have access to a lot of amazing beauty supply stores, and I know that's not the same for everybody in different parts of the country. So another thing that you can do, even though it's sometimes not the best, but it's really affordable, is Amazon, and it can get to you no matter where you are. Amazon actually does sell like real hair extensions, real hair wefts, real hair wigs, all different types. You can get your hands on every single thing that you want in hair pretty much on Amazon if you don't have access to really great beauty supplies. Now, one of my favorite things to do, if it was to order off Amazon, let's say I'm ordering off Amazon and I buy a couple wigs that are advertised as 100% real hair human wigs, but I need them to do a color story. They might not always be 100% real hair. Sometimes they have a synthetic blend, which can kind of mess you up if you're going to do a color story. So whenever I get the hair in, whether it's a full wig, if it's a weft, if it's extensions, if it's a closure, whatever it is, if it says it's real hair, I like to test it before I actually do my full color on it. And I do that by just taking a little test strand, like usually cutting it out of a certain part of the wig and putting maybe a direct dye on it or a toner on it and letting it sit for a few minutes. Then you can see after, let's say 15 minutes, you can open up the foils and see if the hair actually is taking. And if it's real hair, it's going to take. If it's a synthetic blend, you'll start seeing some more transparent hair in between some of the hair that's already taken, and then you'll know it's a synthetic blend. Sometimes you can make wigs like that work. They take practice, but something you need to also think about is if you're styling them, the synthetic blend wigs will fall a little bit. So I always try to test my wigs. If I find one that is really good, I save it so that if I want to go back to that same seller, I know that I got a good wig to begin with. So again, I source my hair from like hair stores around here, but Amazon is a great tool to use, even if it's not everyone's favorite. Now, how do I find photographers and models? So I went over this a little bit in part 1, but I think it's important to touch on it again because I've been working with the same photographer for the last few years. But before that, I was kind of in a position where I was living in a small town and I didn't have access to all the people I have access to now, and that required me to do some research. So let's say I was living back in a small town. I would, again, research everybody in my area, see who kind of has an eye for more of portraits or people that can capture other humans close up versus like landscape or wedding photographers. It's also really like, if you can afford to, I think it's really important to try to research photographers that have done this exact kind of work because they have so much experience in it, even if that requires you potentially traveling. I know for my photographer, every year that he actually lives in Europe, and he comes to the US during like Naha season and shoots a bunch of collections. And people from all over the country fly in to New York, where he's at, and they shoot their collections and then fly home. And I feel like if I was living back in my small town of New Hampshire, I would probably be doing the same because to me, it's so worth it when you're seeking out photographers that actually know what they're doing within like this kind of space. However, it's not necessary. So again, that's where it's important to go back and just make sure that the photographers kind of have an eye for what you're trying to do and have an eye for like beauty photography and know how to shoot hair. And that goes into kind of the models too. So if I, again, looking as if I was living in my small town again, I would do research into sometimes there's local modeling agencies that you don't know about. Let's say in New Hampshire, where I grew up is about like an hour and a half away from Boston. Boston had a bunch of modeling agencies, but some of their models lived in New Hampshire. So I would reach out to modeling agents like that and say, hey, do you guys have any models that, you know, reside closer to this location? And they might. Another thing you can do is, again, research on Instagram or ask for recommendations. This is something you can do for photographers as well. Say you have friends that have shot before, ask for the recommendations and if they have photographer friends that might have experience in this. Or you can reach out to photographers that you like and be like, hey, you know, I know you live far away, but do you have anyone you can recommend that's a little bit closer to this part of the country? So it doesn't hurt to ask, and that's something that I still do to this day. So I would continue to do that if I was living back in a small town again. And this next question I thought was really good, which is how do you select the strongest images once you've shot? And this is such a hard thing when you're doing it because, you know, like sometimes there's hundreds and hundreds of images that you have to go through. And sometimes you have a bunch of shots that are really amazing. So it can be hard, especially when you're really excited about the collection, to kind of narrow it down. Anytime you're doing this, you're gonna immediately narrow it down by just kind of going through and getting rid of all the images that, you know, the model's eyes are closed or no one's paying attention, or you get rid of all the images that you're definitely not going to use and kind of start going through and star or favorite the images that, you know, like the hair looks really good, the model looks really good, the hair and the model look good at the same time. And then towards the end of that, you can go back to your starred images and start going through them again. And my photographer, you know, helps us with that. But you can put two images side by side and decide which one is stronger. And whichever one is stronger stays, the other one goes. Even though it's hard to let go of that one, you kind of have to stay picking the strongest image. And something I always pay attention to also is, especially if you're building a hair collection, is that hair has to be very strong. So if you have, you know, if you have a collection, or if you have like this image, but the model looks really great, but the hair is not quite there, I would still most likely choose the hair as long as the model looks okay in it. Or sometimes you have to go with, you know, the model looking really strong and the hair looking really strong too, but maybe not as much of your favorite as long as the image makes complete sense. And then, so yeah, I feel like it's hard to pick the strong image, but it's really important to really pay attention to the fine details and also go back to what your original inspiration was too, and what image do you initially think is stronger, and kind of go off of your gut as the artist. I've had plenty of times where, you know, I've shot a collection and then let's just say even last year for my texture collection, from that center transparent shot, I had two images that were really, really strong that could go for that center shot. But in my brain, when I built this collection, I had the model with her head turned a little bit, so you could see the fan crisscrossing a little bit and where they intersected, and you can see it was more of like an optical illusion versus the other shot that we were choosing between, the model was facing forward a little bit. And even though it was so cool still, in my gut, I just wanted to choose the original image that I liked. And even though I had all these voices around me telling me to choose the other one. And I'm so glad I did, because I don't regret it at all. Now, next question is, how do you stay motivated and inspired to create? This is something I'm sure all creatives around the world, like, it doesn't even matter what industry you're in, can feel. Sometimes we get into creative ruts. I know I do. Something that I always fall back on is my original, like my Pinterest boards, my saved images on Instagram, and finding things that I was originally inspired by, but also trying to seek out new things that I'm inspired by, whether that is a new fashion designer or maybe a new style of shooting that I want to try. But also, I think it's really important to take breaks, and not force yourself into being super creative if it's not clicking right then and there. I think it's really, really important to take breaks. And I think this can even be small breaks. It doesn't have to be like a week-long break. For instance, I had touched back on in part one where my most recent collection, which is coming out very soon, and I'm so excited to share it. But I had this one, it was my final look I was creating before shooting it. And I had my last image where I had worked on that hair piece for like 8 hours, and I had tried everything to make it work the way I was hoping it was going to work, and it just was not working. Um, but what I had to do, like, my brain wasn't clicking, nothing was working. I was getting frustrated. I was running out of time, but I still took time to take a break. I took a step back. I drank some water. I went for a little walk, and then I kind of went back to the drawing board. And within 30 minutes, I put together this entirely new piece that is, again, one of my favorite images I've ever shot. So I'm really excited to share it. But I can't emphasize enough how important that little break was for me to just kind of reset my brain, get my eyes off of what I'm trying to focus on, and just like reset myself. And I also think, touching on that too, before we move on to the next question, it's really important to surround yourself with people that keep you inspired, and a team of people that push you to be better every single time, or push you to just be creative and do stuff outside of your comfort zone, but also have your back and be real friends. So I know, for instance, before shooting my texture collection last year, I was really close to not shooting. I had gone through a really unfortunate family tragedy, and I was just feeling not very creative, pretty unmotivated, pretty like sad and stuff. And I just didn't know if I had it in me to create another collection. But as I was talking to my team, which is, my stylist, my photographer, my makeup artist, my friends, they kind of, push me to just shoot. They're like, why not just shoot? Just try it. It doesn't have to be so extravagant. It can just be for you. And honestly, that was like the best thing, because for like one of the first times, I took all of the pressure off of myself, and I truly just created to have fun and get into that zone that I love being in, where I create a collection out of something that's in my brain, and it ended up winning. And so, like, that is really special. But if I didn't have that team supporting me, I don't know that I would have shot. So yes, it's important to rely on yourself, but also surround yourself with people that think like you and are like-minded. Sometimes I know it's hard to do that in salon settings. Not everybody will get your dreams or your inspirations, but even just having one person, maybe if it's online, that you can connect with, or like people that you can fall back on that have the same inspirations and or aspirations and like interests as you, I think it's so, so important. Now another question was like, how much time goes into prepping? This is a good one. So it really truly depends on, the depth of your collection and kind of what you're going for, and how intense the pieces are that you intend to build. I usually, sometimes it can take months, it depends on what you think of actual prepping. To me, I'm thinking of, months before, what it is that I'm interested in, starting to gather images, but the real, like, actual, like, hand and hair prepping usually takes at least a couple weeks. And that is because we're working full time. So it's not like you have a week to sit there and every single day, 12 hours a day, get the hair done, which sometimes I still push like that. But it's better when you kind of space it out throughout your work week so you're able to make it work within what you're already doing, and then it's less of a hassle. So I would say bank on it being probably a couple weeks. Um, but again, not a couple weeks where you're working on it all day long. It's little bits and pieces. Now, what's also important to touch on when it comes to prepping is making sure to order your materials in time for them to come in for when you're prepped. So this is why it's important to draw stuff out so you kind of have an idea of, let's say, I know I needed the braids to be thinner. That means the wire that was going in the braids also needed to be thinner, but also very strong. Or, I knew I was creating this huge texture, huge textured shot. So I was going to need a lot of stuff to create that base with. So this is important because you need to time it properly. So when you actually have the time to sit down and start creating it, you have all the materials there ready for you and you're not like running around looking for them. And also important too with prepping is after you've shot your collection, your photographer is going to need time to clean up the images and retouch them and get them ready to submit them. Do whatever it is that you guys decide on doing. It's important that you give them time for that. My photographer is very fast, but not everybody is the same. So make sure that you kind of allot extra time for that. Now, the next question is, do I have to actually go or can I just enter? This is surprise. I was kind of surprised by this question, even though I've gotten it more than once. And no, you don't actually have to go to the awards if you don't want to. There's no like pressure. It's not going to influence whether you win or not. But my thing is if you're nominated, why would you not go? Because you're kind of missing out on this amazing networking opportunity. And again, think of it this way. It's most of these hair award shows are attached to conventions and big hair shows where all of the major brands are there. All of big artists that you already follow and already like are there. CEOs are there. So why are you missing out on the opportunity to go and have your work celebrated? I think I have honestly, it's one of my favorite things is going to hair shows now. And that's because I even have friends that I just see at hair shows and I know I'm going to see them every time. But also, I love seeing what the new work that comes out every year and being able to put a face to the images and also like a face to the name. So I feel like that's super important. Now, what's the last one? Oh, I'm worried that my work isn't original enough. Do I have tips on that? So, yes, I feel like I know that's a common struggle with people because again, we're not always not everything we do is gonna be the first time we're doing it, or the first people to do it. And like I said, for my last year's collection, when I created that really strong triangular textured shape, I'm never gonna be the first person to create a strong shape and textured hair. But what was new to me and more original to me was creating it as wide and as narrow as I did, but also the focus on the texture itself, which was twists kind of slowly unraveling to create this big and broad and spread out texture. So it really can just be things down to the texture or down to the braids you're using that are switching it up and making it more original. I also like to fall. Okay, sorry. I think I got kicked out for a second, but real quick, talking about being more original, I like to fall back on pieces that I like to reconnect with my again my Pinterest boards, my saved images, and also start focusing maybe on things that you aren't seeing in hair already. Maybe it's objects outside of hair, or maybe it's again fashion or architecture. And if it is actual hair itself, just start thinking of ways that you can tweak it to make it a little bit different and make a little bit more sense for your collection. Now, the last question that we're going to go real quick is how to budget properly. And I touched on this a little bit in the first class, but I also think it's important to start by reaching out to the people you want to work with, whether it's the photographers, the models, the makeup artists, and ask them what their rates are. That way you can just get a general idea of what things are going to cost before you kind of jump in and say yes to it. Maybe you're going to find that this photographer is charging a lot more outside of my budget, but this one is more inside my budget and I still really like their work. That can help you start budgeting properly. Also, I think it's so important to think of the materials that you're going to use. Again, this goes back to the drawing. Is it going to be, are you going to need some wire? Are you going to need foam? What are you going to need to create these pieces? And what kind of hair can you use? Do you need it to be real hair? Do you need it to be real human hair? Like, are you doing a color collection and you need it to be able to take it? I think that's super important. A lot of my collections have been kind of style based more than color based. So I've really been able to utilize synthetic hair, which has saved me a lot of money. So that's something I encourage everyone to do is if you can start practicing with synthetic hair, see what you're able to do. And I think you'd be surprised. Let's drop the slideshow for a second. I want to show you guys a couple hair pieces that I have, that I want to use, that I've used in the past. And one of them is for the transparent shot that I had in my texture collection. I built, I wish it was on a clean white background so you guys can see properly. But I built a lot of these individual hair pieces where there's wire on the outside and the inside. And I have hair, let me see if you can see it better. I have hair attaching down to the bottom in tiny knots, and I slowly unraveled it and wrapped it around the top. So I created this transparent piece. This is all synthetic hair. So this cost me, this is like the whole entire shot probably cost me less than $10 to make as far as hair goes, not for everything else. But I ended up creating, a bunch of these and, attached them to the model's hair so you could see a bunch of them lined up, and it created that fanned out look that I was talking about. Now I prepped for myself. So I set myself up for success because I prepped a bunch of those beforehand. I would have never had the time to build those on set, especially because it's just me up there. So building them beforehand, all I had to do the day of was prep my model's natural hair, braid her down, and sew those pieces into the braids. And then she was able to move, and it looked like it was coming out of her actual braids. So that's another thing. Let's pull up the next slide real quick. I want to show you guys something, and it's going to be one more over after this. Yeah, that's the shot I was just talking about. So let's go one more over. And that is going to be this shot, even though it's not from a collection, it's from an editorial I did. So this model came in with probably less than a ½ inch of hair, and the goal was to create this big, like beautiful, structured hair piece. And so in my head, let's drop this image for a second. I wanted to show, I was trying to think of how I could do that. And I was new to figuring out how to take that short of hair and create a piece like that. So you guys know, like those ponytails that you can add into your hair where there's like a drawstring and you wrap the piece around. That comes in all different textures, that comes in all different shades. So I bought one that matched the same texture and color as her hair. And if you were to put this in, I have it right here. If it looks a little crazy because it's been in my closet. But if you had put this on her hair like a regular bun, it would create like that cute pineapple shape, like hair bun. And but in my brain, if you ever looked on the inside of it, there's drawstring with combs on each side. I thought, what happens if you stretch it? What happens if you stretch it really far, and instead of it being a circular shape, you have an elongated shape? And then I was able to take the comb and clip it to, I created a base in the front of her hair and the back with little braids. And then I was able to clip this piece to the front of her head and to the back of her head like this. And I created a base for that kind of mohawk shape. And that is a synthetic piece as well. That costs probably $5. So there's so many different ways you can be smart about creating your bases. Let's go show the next image too, because I used a similar technique, I would say, to take this next image, which is my hairstylist of the year collection. This wig is definitely the biggest wig I've ever made. There's so much hair in there. But something I want you guys to pay attention to is the fact that we're shooting this from the front. That means when you're doing a photo shoot and not a video shoot, sometimes it doesn't really matter what's going on in the back of the head. The front of it looks great. I don't even want you guys to know what the back of it looks like. But for the photo shoot, it didn't necessarily matter because it was, like extra work I didn't need to do. And I needed all the hair pushed forward as much as I possibly could to get the volume I was looking for. But this entire base was created out of a bunch of synthetic hair. And then I attached some real hair extensions to the front to create the airiness and the true beautiful coils that I was trying to showcase. But again, I only spent a little bit of extra money on 1 or 2 packs of real hair extensions when the entire base of it was made out of synthetic. Now, last one, real quick before we end, let's go to the next shot. And this is my newcomer of the year collection. And I built this. This is probably my cheapest collection I've ever made. And all of this is synthetic hair. And you can get synthetic hair in all different, shades and all different styles, textures, all that kind of stuff. Now, these were synthetic platinum bundles, and they had like a body wave to them. So they already had that wave created, but I emphasized that wave with a steamer. So if not all of you know this, you can wrap synthetic hair and set them like you would set it like you would, let's say, a blowout, or if you're doing a roller set or something. And then you go in with a steamer, yes, like a closed steamer, and you steam the synthetic hair and let it sit and dry. And then when you unravel it, you have a beautiful wave. So that's what I did here. But I have just the cheap synthetic wefts right here. And I braided and braided and braided. But something I actually learned because of this is I really like braiding synthetic hair. And that's because there's little to no flyaways. So I used, like a texture paste or a paste that was white so that it kept the platinum. And I just started braiding. But I learned because of this collection that braiding with synthetic hair is actually one of my favorites because of how clean it is and that there's little to no flyaways. And again, this is one of my cheapest collections. So those are just a couple quick examples of ways to save money in the synthetic hair. So let's go to the next slide. And I just have a couple more things to talk about real quick before we hop off. And that's just like we've talked about, how to get from point A to point B with collections, how to break them down. But let's talk about real quick the impact of them. And if you're here listening to this, I would like to assume that you're probably interested in creating collections. And you might be in a place where the people around you might not understand that, and that's okay. But if you create them for you, I think you'll be really blown away by the impact it can have on your career. And obviously this is something I have a huge passion for, but that's because it's allowed me to just create like I've always wanted to, but it's opened so many doors for me, and that goes into opportunity. So the opportunity and like setting up or making collections can set you up profoundly, and it might help open doors that you might not have thought possible, and that goes straight into networking. Again, when you go to these hair shows or you go to these award shows, you're networking with people that have similar passions with you as you, and that's really rare. So I feel like that's probably one of my favorite parts about it as well, and that's something I highly recommend people take advantage of. And that goes straight into recognition. So when you start showing up to these places or you keep entering your work, people are going to start remembering your name, they're going to start remembering your work, they're going to start remembering your face and putting all three together, and then they recognize you, and they recognize you for your work. And then that goes straight into professionalism. And that is collections have like such a huge impact on our career, even if you don't think that they do. And that's because they put a huge jump of professionalism to your work. And people love to see photo shoots. Even if it's your regular day-to-day clients, my clients love to see what photo shoots I'm coming out with next. And I like to use them as kind of advertisement for myself. Let's go to the next slide. It's our last slide before we end class. And that's kind of talking about how it elevates the industry and elevates us as hairstylists. So us as hairstylists, we're kind of always fighting to be seen as professionals. I know sometimes in smaller towns, like where I grew up, that was something I had a hard time with, where maybe people were trying to push me into different career paths. Luckily, my parents were extremely, extremely, you know, supportive of me and stuff like that. So I didn't have it from them, but I had it from other people, and they didn't think that it was, you know, a very strong profession. So I see it as now, even though it's not really, you know, that it's kind of unfortunate that people see it that way. But now that I have these collections under my belt and I have this really elevated line of work, it helps elevate my profession and show them just how like incredible it can be. And that goes into advertising. So every major brand relies on great advertising. Great advertising starts with a great like a great story, a great mood board, a great creative direction, but also a lot of experience and knowledge into what you're advertising. So think of it like you're creating an advertisement for yourself and an advertisement for your work, and then you can never go wrong. This goes into your regular day-to-day work, but especially when you're building collections. Now, lastly, I want to talk about community, and because collections can give you a seat at the table that maybe you didn't have before, or a voice, and also just a community of people that again share the same passions as you, but also I have created the most amazing community and have the most amazing friends. I've met some of the most amazing people because of photo shoots and because of people just like me with the passions just like me connecting and sharing our work together. So let's drop the slides for a second. I hope that if you got the chance to watch both of these lives, that you took a lot from it. Feel free to shoot me messages on Instagram. My DMs are always open. It's the stuff I love to talk about. If you have any questions on where to start or some things you might need a little bit more tips on, let me know. But thank you guys for watching, and thank you 11 Australia for partnering with me. It's been so much fun. Thank you guys. Bye.
The luxury of self-destruction to be self-aware. Wow, my mind malfunctions into disrepair. Smile, I walk to get a drink from the machine. Wow, my mind malfunctions. The luxury of self-destruction to be self-aware.